Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us in this panel today. We have two great speakers, Professor Sahar Khamis. She is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland, College Park, who is an expert on Arab and Muslim media and the former head of the Mass Communication and Information Science Department in Qatar University. Dr. Khamis is a media commentator and analyst, a public speaker, a human rights commissioner in the Human Rights Commission in Montgomery County, Maryland, as well as a radio host who presents a monthly radio show on US Arab Radio, which is the first Arab American radio station broadcasting in the US and Canada. We would encourage everyone to tune in for her radio show. Next, we will have Professor Jing, who is the Harold R.W. Benjamin Professor of International Education in the International Education Policy Program at the University of Maryland, College Park. Professor Lin has done extensive research on peace and environmental education, as well as on spirituality, religion, and education. She is a prolific writer who has written a number of books, and I don't want to go ahead and list them all because it's a long list, and has published as well many articles and book chapters on peace and sustainability education. So I will now pass the floor to Professor Khamis.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel, for this kind and generous introduction. It's always a pleasure to participate in the annual Middle East Dialogue Conference. And today, myself and my co-presenter, Dr. Jing Lin, we decided to have two presentations. I'll start with the presentation on education and peace building that lays the theoretical foundations first, and then Dr. Jing will go ahead and discuss the specifics about our Jewish Muslim Women's Peace Leadership Initiative that we participated in together at the University of Maryland, College Park. So give me a second so I can share my screen, please. All right, so the title of my presentation is going to be Towards an Educational Peace Building Paradigm, Successful Experiments, Limitations, and Future Prospects. So I will skip the outline just to save time here. And I'll start with what are some of the most important current challenges that our world is facing now. Our world is full of so many current challenges, including violence, wars, conflicts, crimes, discrimination, racism, extremism, terrorism, inequality, and I would add to this list as well, polarization and fragmentation. It is not a secret that in recent years, we have seen a surge in division and fragmentation and polarization as well. So some people, unfortunately, perceive, or I should say misperceive, religion as the problem. It's easy for them to say, oh, religion is the problem. If societies do away with religion, they will develop and modernize and they're going to have harmony and peace. But this argument, of course, is very flawed. It neglects a whole set of historical, social, political, and economic factors that contribute to the creation of peace, war, or conflict, and the reasons behind these different wars and conflicts and tensions. Also, it's easy to stigmatize a religion and to equate it with violence and extremism, as in using the faulty term violent Islamic extremism, which the Pope himself totally refuses to use and says it's very offensive. Terrorism, in fact, has no religion. The problem is in the wrong misinterpretation and wrong applications of religion, and therefore we can actually talk about extremism or fundamentalism or terrorism across any different types of groups of people. And in the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict or Palestinian-Israeli conflict in particular, it is really shameful when people say, oh, they're fighting each other because they are quote unquote Jews and Muslims, because Judaism and Islam are two great religions that do not accept any form of violence and brutality. So what is the greatest problem then? The greatest problem is ignorance. Ignorance is the greatest problem and the worst enemy. Humans always are fearful of whatever they're ignorant about. With ignorance comes a monolithic world vision. refusal to have diversity, and lack of acceptance of the other. With ignorance also comes the thriving of violence, extremism, and terrorism, the rise of dictatorship and populism, or what we call the one-man show rule. All of that comes with narrow-mindedness, close-mindedness, and of course, lack of proper awareness of the other. Once we start to build bridges of understanding and awareness, and we dismantle this kind of dangerous and harmful ignorance, then it's possible for us to talk about peaceful coexistence and harmony. The importance of peace-building education, the call for a new educational model or paradigm based on the principles of global citizenship, coexistence, equality, acceptance, and open-mindedness, rechanneling competition from the negative to the positive, from the individualism to the collectivism. And I think the Japanese model in that particular case is very telling and very fruitful in terms of let's do things together, let's win together, let's do away with this sense of like, a zero-sum game. Acknowledging also individual differences and unique skills, not limiting creativity. They say children are so smart until they go to school, because that's when we start to curb their own, free thinking and their own, imagination. And we start to put certain rules which sometimes curb creativity rather than boost it. Taking advantage of current resources, especially new communication tools and new media, such as the internet and social media and internet-based technologies to spread peace. So we have here formal versus informal education. Formal education, of course, takes place in schools, colleges, universities. Informal education outside the classroom, in community centers, in social gatherings, conferences, travels, study abroad programs, places of worship, temples, synagogues, churches, and mosques. Informal education is much more natural and much more spontaneous, and therefore can be much more effective. I hope that we can harness the powers and the potentials of this type of informal education in the realm of peace building, and really trying to build new generations of young people who endorse the values of peace, harmony, and coexistence. Peacemaking versus peace building model. The peacemaking process is more formal, official, governmental, top-down, imposed, and linear, such as between one government and another government, while the peace building is more informal, grassroots, across the board, bottom-up, and more circular and ongoing. The peace building model can be much more effective because it is, again, more natural and spontaneous and represents the people's will and their needs and wants. People are more affected and they learn more and they participate more when they are invested and when they are called upon to participate. So we have to shift away from the top-down, authoritarian, controlled governmental model to a much more bottom-up, grassroots, participatory model. And I think the initiative that my colleague, Dr. Jing will kindly talk about really is an example of this type of peace building. Interfaith dialogue. I'm someone who has been invested in interfaith dialogue for a long time in so many different groups and so many different initiatives. So I'm always very passionate about it. There is, for example, groups here in the DMV area, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, such as JIDS. JIDS is Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society. Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, which brings together Jewish and Muslim women who are invested in peace building efforts and peaceful dialogue. There's the workshop, of course, Jewish and Muslim women's leadership in peace building, which my colleague, Professor Jing will talk about in a moment. There is also the course Youth Voices Online, a digital experiment in Middle East peace building. And there are so many other initiatives, of course, in the region and outside of the region that try to bring together different groups of people, especially in the realm of Middle East dialogue and Middle East peace, and bring together these young people who can share the same vision and the same hopes for the future. Youth participation is very, very important because youth are the future indeed. So one successful example is the Sulia International Connect program, which I had the pleasure and honor of moderating and implementing for the last 17 years, 3 years in Qatar University, where I was the head of the mass communication department and a faculty member, and for the last 15 years also at the University of Maryland, College Park. So the Sulia Connect program is a wonderful experiment, which I hope to see implemented elsewhere because of its really beautiful, fruitful outcomes. It is a youth-led intercultural dialogue project, which brings together youth from different parts of the world, from the Middle East, from the West, from different parts of the world, to have discussions and dialogue together. It links young people across the West and the Middle East through internet-based communication and promotes values of tolerance, conflict resolution, and interfaith dialogue, and has been successfully, as I said, implemented at Qatar University and University of Maryland, and in many other universities and schools, I should say, in the Middle East and in the West as well. How it works, it brings together these young people from different countries together through dialogue, through the internet, moderated sessions twice a week. They have long hours of discussion, but they focus on many different topics related to conflict resolution, peace building, the role of the media in terms of fighting wars and crimes and terrorism and extremism. They discuss a whole broad range of issues, and they become friends. That's the most important part. They become friends after participating in this program. The results have been very impressive. There has been research done on this and showed the before and after results have been striking in terms of changing the attitudes and understanding of the other, right? How do you perceive, for example, those in another culture or another country? There has been a huge difference before compared to after. So I always like to talk of something which is called the golden triangle model. That's what I really believe in wholeheartedly, which has three important dimensions if we want to really move forward to much more peaceful and harmonious world. Investing in youth leadership, in utilization of social media, and in grassroots mobilization. I believe these three dimensions constitute this golden triangle, and if we try to invest in them, we can truly pave the way for a much more peaceful world. So why youth leadership in particular? Well, young people are the fastest growing segment of the population where reform and change is most needed. In the Arab world, for example, 70% of the population are young people under the age of 30 or 35, so there is a lot of hope for the future. They can be agents of change with their own open-mindedness, desire for reform, creativity, energy, determination, and they're also very technologically savvy and very comfortable with using the new media tools and social media tools and techniques. So the second component, why new media in particular? Because new media can accelerate the spread of information to a much wider audience, can raise awareness of corruption and repression in different parts of the world, and I should say also awareness about conflicts, war, crimes, violence, and so on, and can mobilize and coordinate resistance movements and can also provide very important platforms for brainstorming and thinking and exchange of ideas, as in the case of blogs, for example, and other forms of discussion forums online. And they can also put pressure on the regimes or governments to try to change their own ways of doing things and adopting their old ways. They can try to change some of that as well. However, just like everything else in life, social media, as I always tell my students, are not magical tools. They're just tools, and we have to use them in the best possible way, but they also have their limitations, and there are certain limitations that we also have to bear in mind beside that. For example, changing the existing mindsets and patterns of thinking is always a big challenge. You cannot change mindsets and patterns of thinking overnight just because you had a wonderful program like Sulia. So I see it as a right step in the right direction, but we need much more of these initiatives. Also, cultural challenges, giving more empowerment. We need to give more empowerment to women and to minorities. I believe that women should have a very important place at the table of peacemaking and should really try to also have a role in peace building and grassroots activism, because that can help to boost the peace building process a lot. Listening to diverse voices is very important. Fighting against existing structures of bias, inequality, and discrimination in all its different forms. Mainstream media, unfortunately, have been part of the problem rather than being part of the solution, because they adopt the principle of when it bleeds, it leads, which means like when there is really war or conflict or violence, it makes the headlines in the front pages. But peace building initiatives, and peacemaking initiatives are not given the same level of coverage in the mainstream media, unfortunately. Social media can also be a double-edged sword, can increase polarization and division and hostility, and if it falls in the wrong hand. And of course, it can be exactly the opposite. It can build coexistence, harmony, peace, if used correctly. At the end of the day, social media are catalysts, they're amplifiers, but they're not magical tools. It always depends on what we are doing with them and for what purpose. There's also a digital divide. Digital divides between the technological haves and have-nots, and that's a reality. We cannot assume that everyone has access to high-speed, 24/7, high-speed internet in every corner of the world. We're still living in a world where there is this type of digital gap or digital divide. So there are definitely challenges ahead, finding effective ways and effective means through which we can have affordable technology to bridge not only cultures, but also spoken languages, The stakes have never been higher, but I would say also the opportunities have never been greater. So we need to harness these opportunities and use our best possible thinking and planning to make the best out of technology and reach young people to try to push forward some type of grassroots peace building. Future prospects, changing from the sender to receiver model to interactive communication model. Give people a chance to talk and listen to their voices and make sure they are invested in the process. From one-way communication to two-way communication and learning, from top down to bottom up education and learning, and also peace building. Investing in youth and empowering them because they are the future, and also investing in women and empowering them and making sure they have a place at the decision-making table when it comes to the process of pushing forward peace and conflict resolution. Expanding the reliance on social media and new media to create alternative communication models and parallel communication models which give voice to the voiceless, and expanding peace building education to go beyond tolerance to true understanding, because we always say you need to move from tolerance to empathy, to true coexistence, harmony, and true understanding. So I'll stop here. Thank you so much. And of course, I'm going to be happy to take your questions and comments. But now I give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Jing, who is an expert on peace building and a peace scholar expert for many, many years, to share her presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Khamis. I'm not an expert on peace building. what I can say is that I love peace. I don't want to see any wars or atrocities in the world. And so I have a PowerPoint, so I'm going to share a project that Sahar, Dr. Khamis, and Sachi Edwards, Dr. Edwards, and myself, we did a few years ago. So I'm going to share screen. So the project that the three of us had done a few years ago focused on the Jewish Muslim Women's Leadership Initiative. We believe that women needs to be at the table, like Dr. Khamis just said. Women needs to be at the table for peace building, peacemaking, right? If you look at the world right now, you see that how many women are at the table, very few, right? And so we believe that that we need to be present. But before we do that, also we need to build understanding among women around the world in countries and regions of conflicts, right? So there are ways that higher education can help, and activists like us can help. So we got a small grant from the United States Institute of Peace and our dean, and to start this program. So the objective is to help students develop skills in cross-cultural communication and engagement, to educate students about strategies for conflict resolution and peace building, to challenge existing attitudes toward the other, and encourage critical reflection. You know, in our education and socialization of children, people who are different from our culture or who have been involved in historical disputes or conflicts are always presented as the other. And very few efforts are made to understand the other also as fellow human beings. So we want to also inspire young women to become future peace leaders and activists, and to help them build skills and aptitudes for social networking and foster peace building through new media. So that's the strengths and the field Dr. Khamis has worked in, right? So we build that into the program. And finally, to develop tangible steps toward future peace actions. So the research method we use is that we run this program, and then we conducted this qualitative research study, using a feminist approach. So we focus on the voice of the participants, right? And allow them to give their own stories and share their own experiences. So the participants of the program were 14 women. 13 were undergraduate students, and one was graduate student, all from the University of Maryland, College Park. And 8 young women was Muslim, and 6 were Jews. So we did analysis of online discussions. We do participant observation. We did an open-ended questionnaire, and then we reflection among ourselves. So the theoretical and pedagogical framework that guide our program, it was, were like several. One is the contact hypothesis theory. So this theory persists that when people enter into dialogues and have contact with each other, they can build this human dimension, between people who don't usually know each other, and build friendship. And that's a first step toward peace building. So we also consult intergroup contact theory and peace education studies. So we focus on peace building. Many of the work in colleges and universities that talk about peace and conflict resolution focus mainly on conflicts and security studies. So we want to focus on peace building. That is, to change attitudes, to learn skills, to build a connection of the heart, to have a genuine cultural understanding. And so we focus also on agency and action. That is that the young women would also build up skills, and they also form teams to take actions after the program. So we have a particular focus, which is the Israeli and Palestine conflict. So we explore effective ways for helping students to deal with their differences and find their commonalities, right? Remember these are young women who almost never interacted with each other. And so we stress an ethic of care. That is care is central in our program, in our conversations, and so on. And we focus on the need for raising consciousness and cultivating wisdom, and insight, and humility and love. So the students join, right, join the inquiry as someone who have their own voice, right, and they are exploring and finding ways for peace and for cultural understanding. So we hope to help them challenge the traditional Palestinian and Israel binary, right, as they are fixated identity, and move toward plural, multidimensional identities and possibilities. So we also draw from the concept of critical emotional praxis, where educators encourage empathetic communication through understanding each other's likings and feelings. Zemplis did a research on the conflicts in the Middle East and Israel, and talk about how after conflict, emotions remain strong. And so we have to engage in the emotions of people and have people to be able to see critically where problems come from, and then find ways to build commonalities. So also we try to create a so-called third space, a fluid space, right? Then where people can recategorize themselves, re-identify themselves, in the becoming and new making process. So the stage one of the program is to facilitate online readings and discussions. So we spent quite some time before the program started to have students to read resources and then share their views online, and started discussion and debates online before we started the workshop, right? So multiple perspectives are presented in the readings on the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And these materials also cover conflict resolution and peace building techniques, and also the potential impact of social media on the Middle East peace process. And also the readings and the materials include women's potential as leaders in the peace process. So the students actively engage in the reading and sharing of their thoughts on the readings. And actually some conflicts was struck up by some different views on the reading materials, such as, who is wrong, who is right, who has the ownership of this land and that land. And so the conflicts was like quite tense. But then Sachi Edward, she's very skillful in having people to come down and then share their views and tell where they come from and mediate, the dialogue. So in stage 2, we have a full day workshop, right? So the workshop focused on dialogues about major lessons learned in the stage of the first part of the program. So students openly share why they felt about certain issues in a certain way, and where the strong emotion arise. And this conversation was very helpful because for the first time they've heard different opinions about certain issues, and they share how they went to school or their society or their social events never told them the other part's story. And we have a great guest speaker, Dr. Barbara Wien. She's an incredible peacemaker, and she's demonstrated great courage. She stopped in front of a tank. She stopped genocide. She's done peace education work, tirelessly. So she did a very wonderful activity with the class, looking at human history, the wars and conflicts, and the challenges that's built up, and where we are now, and women's role in the whole process. And so then the students work in small groups, talking about their perspectives, and then the perspective in their community about peace building, and then the campus organizations that they have joined, and ideas that they can, things that they can do together. And also they learn about existing opportunities for engagement in Jewish-Muslim peace building. And then so we have breakfast together, lunch together, and dinner together. And the dinner was in the Jewish Student Center, Hillel House. And it was a wonderful dinner. And one student live tweeted the entire day on her Twitter page to over 8,000 followers. So the stage 3 of our program is action. So project included, these are all students' initiatives, right? A Jewish Muslim book club. And they also did a membership campaign to attract students to the Jewish Muslim Alliance that some of the students started. They also organized an event, bring in Palestinian and Jewish students to the United States, to the University of Maryland campus, and have dialogues and events together. So the YouTube video are promoting peace between Jews and Muslims, featuring all members of the participants of the workshop, of the program, receive 5,000 views after 1 year. But somehow the student, now I think deleted the video. So the learning and the impact, right? So students learn multiple perspectives, right? They learn the history of Israel-Palestinian conflict from both perspectives. And this provided, this proved to be the most difficult and emotional aspect of the program, but also the most impactful and effective, right? As one young Muslim woman said, growing up, I was always taught the Palestinian side of things, and I didn't even know that a different perspective existed. Now that I see how differently things are viewed, I try and read both sides I internally try to come to a mid-ground to what may have really happened, as best as I can, at least. And so with this different views and so on, facilitator intervention are required at times. And also a theme that come out of the program is sisterhood and peace activism. They found, students found new appreciation for their potential as women to contribute to peace building. Sisterhood is the key, one participant said. Through this unique workshop, we show that women have such similarities across the board that by joining together through those commonalities, the politics and the propaganda simply fall away. Women therefore have a unique motivation for peace because of our first job is to be mothers. We must protect our families. And one other participant said, I learned that we are important and vital actors in peace building initiatives. And also students find that that they are connected by religion. So when the programs, the workshop started, it was a big surprise actually for the students to learn that they both say shalom, salam, and it's similar food and have similar cultural, customs and so on. So although religion is often misperceived as a divisive factor, right, between Jews and Muslims, the students find that it's a unifying force. And so we did an activity called what unifies us and what divides us, right? And all the students mentioned that religion is a unifier, not a divisor. And things they share in common is that they have commitment to their faith, tradition, and culture. They struggle, as religious minorities in the United States. They share the Abrahamic spiritual lineage and heritage. And also students share that they have attitude changes. Several participants express a change in their attitudes toward the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? One Muslim student said, I'm definitely more sensitive about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and other people's opinions on this issue and others. I'm more understanding of the dual nature of the conflict and the fact that there's a reasonable explanation for both sides of a conflict, and that much conflict stems from emotions. And the Jewish student said, before participating in this program, I have been told both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but only in an all-Jewish setting. So obviously, my perspective on the issue was a little biased. I had gotten my information about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from my family, friends, and the Jewish schools that I have attended. Actually, the student was surprised to hear that people can think otherwise and have different views and opinions. So it was really a mind-opening event for her. And then skills in intercultural communication, students learn more effective means of communicating with those who have different backgrounds and different opinions than they do. One Muslim participant said, I have learned that to be most effective in exchanging peaceful dialogue, one must first establish the similarities and common goals. I think we can all resonate with that, right? Then moving on to a heated topic doesn't sound so threatening and intimidating. And one Jewish participant said, before the program, I had never had a productive discussion on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with those who had opposing views on the situation from mine, but I learned how to have a good and useful discussion and progress toward peace. So these are all very encouraging quotes that we get from the participants after the workshop. So major takeaways for us as facilitators, right? We find it necessary to help students learn about multiple perspectives at the beginning of the program. This sets a foundation for the type of thought processes needed throughout the rest of the program. We also find that incorporating emotion is difficult and needs to be carefully managed by us as facilitators. But this can be extremely beneficial to the learning process and to self-reflexivity. And also, we find that it's important to develop tangible projects, right? And foster through the program, which allows actions to continue after the program is over. And social media is an ideal tool for attracting and maintaining participation in peace-building initiatives. So a final word, coming back to Dr. Khamis' point of view, that a new triangle is very powerful for peace building. We really want to focus on grassroots mobilization, youth activism, and deploying new media. We think that we can work to cultivate peace educators, right, in the bottom-up approach, in the grassroots approach. So this is the group. This is the picture that we took after the whole day workshop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. We have a handful of questions. There's a question from Mira M. Smith. Do you know if these types of initiatives currently exist in the Middle East, in Israel, for example, and perhaps could this be done through connections with universities there?
Yeah, let me quickly comment on this. Actually, as my great colleague, Dr. Jing, was talking, I was just jotting down some names of different initiatives that are actually taking place in the region, which are very, very powerful and very strong. One of them is called New Story Leadership. So New Story Leadership brings together young people from, both sides, from Israel, from Palestine, who actually share their stories, right? They share their own storytelling as a way of trying to bridge some of the gaps and some of the differences, and to narrow the gap between self and other, and to understand the perspective of the other side. So this is one important initiative. Another initiative is called Seeds of Peace, which also brings together youth. It also has an emphasis or a focus on young people in particular, and tries to bring them together for the purpose of peace building. There are also other initiatives not necessarily focused on young people, but for example, the Bereaving Parents Circle has been a fantastic, definitely a grassroots initiative that brings together the parents of those who lost their lives, the young people who lost their lives in the midst of this terrible ongoing conflict that has been going on for more than 70 years, as we know, and claimed lives, of course, from the Palestinian and the Israeli side. The Bereaving Parents Circle brings together people in compassion because they share the same pain of losing their loved one, in this case, their most loved one, i.e., their own children, right? So there couldn't be another more traumatic experience in life than losing your own child, and they share this pain. But instead of making this pain drive them apart, it makes it bring them together and give us an example or a really wonderful role model for how pain can be a reason to bring people together rather than to divide them and tear them apart. There is also another initiative on top of everything else I mentioned during my presentation. It is called Jamaat, which is Jews and Muslim and allies acting together. So it is Jamaat, J-A-M-A-A-T, and in Arabic we call it Jama'at, which means like group, right? So it is really also an organization at the grassroots level that tries to bring together Jews and Muslims and their allies in the area and beyond to try to work together to resolve some of these issues, at least to pave the way for the resolution of these issues. Because I know sometimes people will shrug their shoulders and say, oh, this has been a very tenacious conflict. It's been going on for more than 70 years. Do you think that these small scale grassroots efforts are gonna really make a difference? And I always say it's the drops that make the ocean. The ocean is made up of small drops, right? So we cannot really think of the ocean without thinking of these small drops. So I see all of these initiatives as important drops in this important sea or ocean that we want to build, which is called conflict resolution and peace building. Dr. Jing, if you want to add anything else to what I just said, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Khamis. I have read some studies. For example, I read about bilingual schools in Israel, where the Arab families and then Jewish families, right, send their kids to the same school. And then parents are involved in school activities together, and they celebrate each other's holidays, and also they make sure that the curriculum represents, the history of both groups. And so I think it's a very powerful, right, important way to build bridge of understanding and peace. And one scholar, she did many years of study of programs in Israel, and she found that there are programs that have the young people to come together to play in theater and engage in arts activities, right, to build peace understanding. But then she compared with other programs that use participation, but also, let's say, critical thinking, right, to understand, let's say, where this conflict come from, right? There's this like economic, social, political, structural injustices and so on. And she found that the program that engage young people in critical thinking has a much longer impact afterwards. They tend to be more engaged and started their own grassroots efforts and so on. So there are a lot of very interesting studies about initiatives and so on. I know a colleague in university in Israel, and she tried to do a lot of work, but she also faced a lot of counter actions or problems and so on. For example, she would take both Jewish and Jewish and Arab college students to visit some place, and they are in the same bus, same car. And then they got stopped at the checkpoint. So only the Arab students, have to show their ID, check and so on. So that caused also a lot of, additional issues, right, to think about. So yeah, I've read and heard about it. I know several very, very active peace educators in Israel.
I just want to add to what
just go ahead, please.
I just wanted to add to what my colleague, Dr. Jing, just said now, that the school that she mentioned is really a unique experiment. It's called Hagar. The school is called Hagar, Hagar, after the name of of course, one of the wives of our beloved prophet Abraham. And the school itself is a unique experiment because really this whole idea of co-education, or bringing together Jewish and Muslim students, or Palestinian and Israeli student in this case, of course, only until I believe middle school, like elementary school, middle school. I hope to see something that goes beyond that, maybe to other levels of education. But of course, it's a great experiment in and of itself, a unique experiment that I would love to see replicated elsewhere. And they really also try to navigate the difficult and thorny issues and controversies, right? For example, when the Israeli children are celebrating the Day of Independence, the Palestinian children are mourning, and they are really sad because this is quote unquote the day of catastrophe, or Nakba, for them. So how can the teachers then navigate some of these differences and some of these gaps? Requires a lot of skills on their part, but I believe it's a very important experiment.
And it's very interesting because really it's the people whose regular daily lives are being affected by the conflict. So when anybody asks, can these movements really do something? The question is really, well, can civil society do something? Because this is about the participation of civil society. And I think there is no question, and it would be difficult to make the argument that civil society is not important for political change, political reform, and societal change in general, because it is precisely where the governments are failing to provide solutions that the civil society can then come in and try to fill that gap with small actions that overall will have a general impact in the long term. We have another question from Jacob Smith. Were there any challenges or difficulties emotionally from participants during the implementation of the program that Professor Lin spoke about?
Jing, you want to start?
Why don't you start first?
I think that Dr. Lin mentioned in her own presentation some of these examples, right? some of these students were meeting each other for the first time, and getting to build this kind of friendship and this kind of knowing the other. Even listening to the other side for the very first time was an eye-opening experience for them, right? So we started to see things like some of the comments and the quotes that Dr. Jing has mentioned during her presentation, right? Oh, I've always been hearing the Palestinian narrative. I've never had a chance to listen to the other side, and vice versa. I've always been hearing the Israeli narrative only, and I never really had a chance firsthand to listen to the voices of people from the other side who represent a different perspective. And it's this moment when you bring people together in the same room, and they share breakfast, lunch, dinner together. They start to listen to each other. They agree, and they also respectfully disagree. And that was one of the most important principles we put from day one and from the very beginning of our workshop was, yes, we can disagree as long as we have certain guidelines, we have certain rules, right? Rules for dialogue. We have to be respectful. We don't offend the other. You can speak your mind. You can say whatever you want without being hostile or without being offensive to the other. I was hoping that we can see this kind of model really in real politics, right? Because I was talking in my presentation about peace building versus peacemaking, and I believe governments, unfortunately, have not been doing a good job at all in terms of bridging the gaps and narrowing the distance. They've been doing the exact opposite, increasing the gap and the distance and increasing the polarization and the division, many times with propaganda. The type of media discourse is terrible. The type of governance is horrible. I think we need youth, and we need women, and we need peacemakers at the table. And that would make a huge difference, in my opinion, in the peacemaking process in many conflicts, including the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You want to add anything, Jing?
Yeah, I think one challenge was like, how do you handle controversial different let's say different issues, right? I remember one was about a reading, it was about I think land dispute, and so one Jewish student was very angry at the views of the article, and then other Muslim students counter that view, and then so it was like a little bit tense, and emotional. But we try to help them say, okay, where you get this view, why you are angry about this, and then they say, oh, I've always heard from my grandpa, and then the other student will say, oh, my mother has always told me this, right? So it's like they are bringing out these personal stories, but then I think that they are also aware this other person in front of me is a living being, is a person who is similar to me. So then they try to, let's say, move ahead of themselves, more beyond themselves, to understand the position the other person come from. So so that's what I meant when I did a presentation, that this emotional struggles it's tough, right? But it can be turned into a moment to build understandings.
Thank you. And following up with that question, did you remember any moments that were very challenging that went unresolved?
No, I think we had excellent, I think, moderation skills in the room. I think, as I said, Dr. Jing is really the expert on peace studies. She's being modest when she says, oh, I'm not an expert. She is an expert in the area of peace building. And she was using all of these skills and theoretical knowledge practically in the room. Also, Dr. Barbara Vane, who is also the speaker in this workshop as well herself, she has been an activist in the area of peace building for many years. I am more of a communication scholar, so I'm somehow the guest of honor, if you will, in the peace building realm, but I'm very much invested in it because of my activism in the realm of interfaith dialogue and membership in groups like JIDS, Jewish Islamic Dialogue Society, and Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, which I'm very proud of, and other initiatives that I'm involved in for many years. So I think all of us, the three of us, brought our own theoretical and practical insight, as well as our own skills and experience in the area of activism and peace building and interfaith dialogue for a number of years to the room. So whenever we saw a situation that is more like tense or emotional, as Dr. Jing was saying, and can potentially be more explosive. We were able to kind of control it and say, okay, can you please tell me, why do you feel this way? You know, where is this idea coming from? Why do you have this kind of attitude, right? And then the person started to say, oh, it's because of this background. I read this article. And then we say, okay, but maybe there are other different types of readings, other types of articles, other types of literature, other types of view. Did you also read this, this, and that? Can you possibly listen to the other side? So we always try to channel these difficult, insensitive, and controversial moments into a better direction, right? In order to say, okay, how do you feel this way? Why do you feel this way? Let's do something about it. Let's listen to the other side. So I believe the situations were very well contained and managed at the end of the day. And the most important thing is that these young ladies, these young women, then came out not just with new understanding and new knowledge, but also new friendships. And that's a very, very important thing. The Solia International Connect program, which I referred to in my presentation, also does the same. People come from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different countries, cultures. And at the beginning, it's a little bit tense and difficult and uncomfortable. By the time they finish the program, they're friends, they're emailing each other, they're chatting, they're doing Zoom sessions together, Skype, even informally after the end of the program. And I believe it's this kind of human to human or person to person or people to people kind of diplomacy is what we need the most. Religious diplomacy, interfaith diplomacy, person to person diplomacy. If we hope to change the world in a better direction, that's what we need to invest in.
And it's interesting, but it sounds tough. It sounds really tough because we're really talking. I mean, among other things, it's very much emotional issues, and to the point that facilitators really have to be trained to an extent on handling these interactions. Because, I mean, the question you made, well, I feel this way, but why do you feel this way, and where does that feeling come from? That can be even a very therapeutic way of dealing with things, in the sense of, well, let's work on recognizing our own feelings before we have a feeling and just reacting to it. Let's stop for a moment and try to analyze ourselves, or have some self-reflection as to why we are feeling this way. And I suppose that because one arrives at that type of emotional vulnerability in a group setting, that necessarily facilitates bonding, friendships at the end of this.
I think Dr. Jing wanted to add something quickly. Dr. Jing?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that when students learn that, they have only been presented only one voice, one perspective, and then the other person who is like equally a human being has, experienced similar, have different experience and different point of view, right? That was the moment I think that they realized that, I have to listen to the other person, that, I have been very limited in my own perspective and in my own experience. One thing I want to say is that, role model is so important. I think that Barbara Wien is an incredible person, right? She is the one who as I've mentioned, that she has incredible courage, but also she has a lot of skills. Like she stopped a big gang fight, she stopped like one group of young people who tried to harass a Muslim young man after 9/11. So she's there. She presents really as this very good example for the students, for all of us. That peace requires courage, right? So the courage could be not only facing machine guns that she has done, but also like facing ourselves, right? Our inner emotions and so on.
We have one more question from Professor Ilan Fuchs. He's one of our speakers today, actually. And his question is there any quantitative data collection as part of these programs?
No, we didn't do any quantitative collection.
Yeah, the workshop itself was a small size workshop. As Dr. Jing said, we had 13, I believe, Jewish students and 8 Muslim women students. And it's a small workshop, and we did it as a qualitative study. So, both of us do qualitative work, myself and Dr. Jing. We're qualitative scholars. We do ethnographic work, qualitative work, and that's what we have been using. It would be interesting to have maybe a large scale study, a similar study maybe on a larger scale that will have a bigger number of participants, and therefore maybe can lend itself to having some kind of quantitative data that would come out of this. I think it would be a very interesting, very important idea, very important initiative, but that's not what we have done in this particular case.
Another question from the same person, Ilan Fuchs. Is there anyone in this space that does quantitative work?
Dr. Jing, you'd like to answer that? Do you know of other scholars or writers or experts who do this kind of work, but also document it quantitatively?
I have not read those kind of studies. Many of the peace education programs, right? They focus on participatory actions, so many are like qualitative research. But there are people now who are arguing, that peace education research, right, should not focus on, let's say, from point A to point Z, right? And then quantify the changes in the middle, because there's so many variables. It's hard to say, okay, oh, I become more peaceful, or I want to work for peace after this, right? Because your uncle may influence you who is not a participant and stuff, right? But so they're saying that now we need to have this multidimensional kind of like peace education research, some focus on peacefulness, or let's say just the action you're taking, or just the participation, or but most of them are very how to say, individual and experiential, right? There's a book that that's published in the book series that I co-edited. It's on peace education. It's called Peace Education Evaluation, by what's their name? 2 authors. It's really good. It's really good, and it talks about how many different dimensions you can have, and methods you can have to, to evaluate a peace education program.
Yeah, I think that there has been a lot of this emphasis on participatory action research, what you call participatory action research. Like this workshop is one good example, and most of the work has been qualitative, ethnographic, if you will. But definitely, it would be very interesting to have a mixed methods approach that maybe will also combine some of these methodologies with other types of methodologies and data collection tools and techniques, such as quantitative data analysis. Maybe some of the initiatives I mentioned that focus specifically on youth, like New Story Leadership, like Seeds of Peace. If somebody would do some kind of study combining, a mixed methods approach that has the ethnographic qualitative research, action-oriented research, as well as quantitative research as well, I think that would be a wonderful contribution to this body of knowledge.
Well, those were all the questions, so I think we can go ahead and close this session now. Thank you very much.
I think, Daniel, I saw one comment in the chat box about the Sulia program. Somebody made a comment on the Sulia program, maybe, but I did not read the whole thing. Can you read it if you don't mind?
Natalie Vinsky Ibrahim, she says, I believe that Sulia does quantitative research on its programs.
Excellent. Natalie, thank you so much for joining. Natalie is actually a PhD student at the University of Maryland, and I'm serving on her PhD committee. So I want to thank her for joining. And this is an excellent point, because the Sulia Connect program indeed does actually create some graphs and some results and some designs, like I showed in my own presentation, that they have some of these visual representations and some of these tables, diagrams, graphs that show the before and after effects, right? What were the attitudes and the beliefs of people who were participants in this program before taking part or participating in the program, and what were some of their own shifting, ideas, beliefs, and attitudes after their participation in the program. So indeed, the Sulia Connect program does include this component of the quantitative evaluation we're talking about, and the before and after comparison as well.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Khamis, and thank you very much, Professor Lin. This was a very interesting presentation on a very intriguing initiative that hopefully we'll see replicated more and more. Well, not just here in the US, but really throughout countries that could use this sort of grassroots initiatives in the future. So thank you very much, everyone, and we hope to see you in the next panels.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Always
Daniel.
a pleasure. Always a pleasure to take part in the Middle East Dialogue Conference. And I very much hope and pray that next year we're going to be meeting not just virtually on Zoom, but actually in the same room, face to face, in person in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much.
I do hope so too.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.